Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network, a division of the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network. The following program broadcast is an original creation by the broadcast entity. Discussion within the following broadcast should be used for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice or consultation. Before considering application of any broadcast content in the following program, please consult your healthcare provider. If you feel you are having a medical emergency, please contact your local health services for immediate assistance. MS&Me Media and the Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network do not guarantee or warrant the accuracy of information in the broadcast to follow. The Multiple Sclerosis Global Support Network provisions broadcast services to program hosts. Information discussed in the broadcast does not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or goals of the network and are solely those of the show broadcast host. Should you wish to host a broadcast, please visit our website at msmemedia.com and submit a request to become a program host. We thank you for listening to the MS&Me Radio Network. Enjoy the show.
This is Lean Into Lonely. My name is Kate Milliken, and in 2006, I was diagnosed with MS. I was 35, single, and I couldn't walk. And I'll never forget how lonely I felt as I came to terms with my new normal. Upon further reflection, I realized my whole life had been dotted with lonely moments. I was lonely when my brother got invited to a party and I didn't. I was lonely when I didn't get into my first choice college. I was really lonely when I got ditched at the altar 2 months before my wedding. And as a startup entrepreneur, now working to eliminate the problem of loneliness in chronic illness, I realized I'm still lonely. Instead of hiding from these moments, I'm taking the opposite approach, and this podcast blows open moments like these from people like you. This is Lean Into Lonely. So by the middle of 2013, I had built my prototype of my counterpain.com, and I knew I needed to start getting the word out. But I really didn't know what I was doing. So I went online and read some advice on how to get this started. And one tip that came up was reaching out to prominent bloggers in the space. So there were two that I really found that have been allies ever since. And one of them is Mark Stecker from Wheelchair Kamikaze. Mark does an incredible job deep diving into subjects and educating his following. And he's just a beautiful soul with an incredibly smart mind. The other one is a man named Mitch Sturgeon, who has a blog called Enjoying the Ride. And from the get-go, Mitch was present, responsive. He has incredible writing about his own experiences and observations on his world with MS. And he has an awesome sense of humor. And I've truly enjoyed getting to know him. And watching him document his own progression with MS has been profound. And that's why I wanted to have him on the podcast today. Okay, Mitch Sturgeon, I'm so happy to have you on Lean Into Lonely. It is always a pleasure to connect with you. I feel like we primarily connect online, but I will say from the moment I met you, you were one of the most responsive people I've ever met in terms of immediate answers. And for somebody who's a little ADHD, it's like really awesome having you as my cohort. Just an FYI.
Okay, glad to do it, Kate. I've enjoyed our interactions, and I think you're a true leader in the field of MS. So, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for the compliment. So, why don't we start actually just to kind of set the groundwork? A little bit about you, Mitch, in terms of you living with MS, when it began, and where you're at today.
Sure. So, back in 2001, I felt just a little. I call it a hitch in my step, just a little innocuous limp. And I started going to doctors to figure out what was going on, and, yada, yada, yada. A year and a half later, I was diagnosed with primary progressive MS. And then I just started this long, steady journey. So for people who don't know, primary progressive is more of a steady progression. I don't have the relapses and remissions. I don't have the good days and bad days. So I just started this steady progression where I started getting more and more disability, mostly in my lower body. So I went, first I started with a cane, then crutches, then a scooter, and then a wheelchair. So by 2008, 7 years in, I was in a wheelchair, and I hoped that it wouldn't affect my upper body. But sure enough, about 2009, MS started getting into my upper body. So now I'm pretty much similar to what a person with spinal cord injury would be, a quadriplegic. I've got some use of my hands, but not a lot. So that's kind of where I am. Doesn't sound like a great place, but there are, as we'll talk about, there are ways to cope.
Well, one of the things I have really appreciated as someone who's not living the primary progressive experience is getting to hear about your moments and kind of getting to follow along with your blog, Enjoying the Ride. So how did you decide to start throwing it outwards?
Yeah, I'm a natural introvert, so I was kind of surprised at myself. But when my disease got so far along, I started reading a lot of blogs, Mark Stecker's among them, and I just thought that I had a story, I had something to contribute. So I just started putting a few posts out there, and boy, the responses were tremendous, and it just kind of caught on, and now, my goodness, I'm 8 years into this blog post. In fact, today I'm going to post my 500th blog post.
Wow.
And it's just been such a great experience for me. I kind of feel selfish sometimes that so many people say I'm helping them, but every time I get positive feedback, it sure does something to my soul to make me feel good about what I'm doing too. So I've just fed off the positive feedback I've received, and I keep writing, and people seem to keep reading.
So after reading Mark Stecker's blog, which arguably could be a little bit intimidating, I mean, that dude really throws it out there in a way of pure knowledge, right?
Right.
But
he's not only a great writer, but he dives into MS like nobody else and really lays out the facts for people. So yeah, it was a bit intimidating, but like with you and I, when I connected with Mark, he was just friendly and helpful, and we've got this community of people that just want to help one another get our messages out.
Yeah. And in some ways, actually, I feel like Mark, when you've watched his blog progress, he's kind of turned almost into an investigative reporter. I mean, he's really gone into medicines and clinical trials, and you can learn a lot. But at that time that you were inspired by him, you said that you felt like you had something to contribute. Can you go a little bit further and try to put into words what you think it was that you wanted to show the world or talk about?
Yeah, I guess I have this gift of resilience and positivity. And I know that there are so many people out there that either don't have that, is their natural makeup, or just aren't able to dig their way out of the hole that MS can kind of put you into. So I just thought it would be nice if I could talk to people about how I live my life and how I'm able to overcome some of these challenges, and just get the message of positivity. Not so much hope. I hesitate to say hope because I'm not the guy that says there's a cure right around the corner. But I'm the guy that says that you can enjoy life despite the challenges if you just take some certain steps that I've tried to outline, like just living for the positive, surrounding yourself with friends, not falling back into, and don't hide within your four walls and shun people. Just a lot of daily advice. Some of it's kind of just run of the mill advice, but it's what's worked for me, and I just thought it would be nice if I could share that with people, and it sure has been.
I feel like when you and me became friends and I was telling you about what I was doing, you were so wonderful. I had this image or this vision that by using the storytelling tool we have on my counterpane, that you could really lay out your story from the moments you knew something was wrong. And you did an astonishing job laying out your story. And any viewer or listener who is listening to this right now, I cannot encourage you enough to go onto my Counterpane MS go and do a search under the profile search for Mitch Sturgeon and click the double arrows facing left to do the play-by-play of what Mitch went through, ranging from kind of knowing something was wrong, hiding it from your family, getting a bad diagnosis from a doctor, being honest enough to talk about weeping when you finally heard the diagnosis with your wife in a parking lot. Where was the first moment of that journey where you realized there was something conscious you could choose to decide that might change the trajectory of the way you lived your life? Can you remember?
Yeah, in a sense, but with me, it was always there. Mm-hmm. It was my natural response to stressful situations. So, I can't tell the story of reaching, that classic story is your life is going along fine, something bad happens, you fall down into a pit of despair and you claw your way out. I never really ended up in that pit of despair. I certainly had bad moments when I received the diagnosis and so forth, but it was just my natural inclination to start looking for the positive immediately. And a lot of that comes from my mother. My mother was a spinal cord injury, had a spinal cord injury, and she was a quadriplegic. And I grew up with her, and she espoused these same virtues that I try to espouse. And it just was natural for me to immediately start looking for the positive. I would say my entire pit of despair lasted about 2 hours. And I know that that's not normal, and I don't expect everyone to be able to just go that way like I did. But again, I don't think that's all there is to it. That I do have some specific advice, and I've tried to give that. But as far as my personal experience, it was probably because of my mother. It was almost immediately. I went right into, okay, this is my new world. What do I do now?
Yeah. The, one moment for me, I mean, it's pretty incredible to have someone as good a writer and who is as honest as you really lay out those kind of emotional ups and downs. And I mean, it's funny you talk about enjoying the ride. Like, I've enjoyed the ride, kind of seeing where your MS story has gone. And I remember one part of your journey really being enlightening for me. And that is you had this part, and I can't remember what year it was, but you ended up moving into a wheelchair, and you got some ridiculous badass wheelchair that completely transformed your life. And I feel like, before you tell everyone what it was, I feel like there's this assumption when you're diagnosed with MS that when you and I use these words, succumb or forced into an assistive device, that it's a total negative. But I do remember reading your post about this wheelchair where you showed how it could be transformative. Want to talk about that?
Yeah. So it's not only that wheelchair, that was probably the best example, but I found that every time that I needed a new assistive device as my disease progressed, that, in some ways it marked the progression, and it was a sad event. But what's really happened every time that I've adopted a new assistive device is that I've regained freedoms that I had lost. So on the outside looking in, you might say, oh no, now he's using crutches, now he's using a cane. But from the inside looking out, it's like when I realized here's a new assistive device, and all of a sudden I could do things that I haven't been able to do in months or years. So the epitome of that was the iBot wheelchair that I got in 2008, the iBot. So, wheelchairs, I like to tell the story that, wheelchairs are supposed to go to people who fall off buildings and get run over, or skiing accidents or whatever. Somebody brings you the chair and says, this is what you're in now. But it's a weird situation when you're slowly progressing and you're wondering, do I need a wheelchair today? No, I don't think so. Then do I need a wheelchair tomorrow? No. Is this the day I need a wheelchair? It's hard to know, and you kind of beat yourself up. And I almost wished for the day that I would need a wheelchair as I was approaching it, because I just knew that it would, then I would have to stop worrying about it. I could say, there, that's done.
You got there. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So when I finally got this wheelchair, or actually I was leading up to needing a wheelchair, and I was up late at night, and I watched a commercial for this wheelchair that would just do everything. It would climb stairs, It would bring me up in balance mode, up to the height, eye level with people, and all kinds of other things. So all of a sudden I said, this isn't a wheelchair that, I'll dread getting into. This is something that is going to make me a cooler guy. And so I got the wheelchair, and sure enough, I was able to go out into the world in a wheelchair for the first time, just guns a-blazing, if you will, and just say, this is me. Check me out, and I've got a cool wheelchair, and that certainly helped. Now everybody doesn't get one of those wheelchairs, but the point is, when you adopt any kind of assisted device, take note of the fact that all of a sudden your life gets better, not worse, for the time that you're adjusting to that new device.
You kind of, I don't know, are you familiar with the movie Her and it's starring Joaquin Phoenix?
No.
No, well, he basically falls in love with a tech device, and you kind of remind me of that.
Yeah. Well, the iBot and I we're pretty tight.
Yeah. Well, look, it's I've often wondered, that whole idea of being eye level, and how much of, in terms of who you are in that wheelchair, can if somebody has a reaction, how much of their reaction is affected by how you act in the chair.
Yeah. That's another thing too. Is I take it upon myself to be an ambassador for the disabled community when I'm out in chairs. So if somebody seems to be uncomfortable around my chair, I find that a big smile and a hello and let me tell you about my wheelchair goes a long distance. It goes a long way. So
yeah.
So I don't want to put the onus. Disabled people have the right to go out in public and be grumpy if they want to, if they're having a bad day. But whenever you get the chance, boy, if you can just engage with people, show them that inside this broken body, there's a normal human being who would like to talk to you and interact in a positive way with you, then you've become an ambassador for the disabled community.
Yeah, and that it's okay that if somebody feels a little bit uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, especially kids. So I'll be in the iBot wheelchair and I'm zipping down the grocery store aisle, and a mother and a small child sees me. She'll grab her child. I don't know if it's to protect her child or if it's to make room for me.
You have a very dangerous face.
I know I can be scary, but I take those instances to say to the mom, it's fine, it's no problem. Or if the little kid comes up to me and says, why are you not walking? And the mother will be appalled, and I'll try to make both the kid and the mother feel comfortable and say, no, that's a very good question. So talking about, what's going on, it might not be appropriate for an adult to walk right up to me and say, hey, you in a wheelchair, why are you in a wheelchair? But if you just open up the dialogue, you often get there in a way that isn't inappropriate, and in a way that you can talk about your challenges and talk about what it's like to be disabled. And so I open up as much as I can and interact with everybody out there. And, once in a while I'm disappointed, but almost always it turns into a good interaction.
Yeah. In light, one of the things that I've really appreciated is, somehow through all of your changes, you have this wonderful sense of rhythm and momentum. But in the spirit of this show, leaning into lonely, I'm curious if you can think about one moment where it didn't feel positive or someplace that was really challenging for you.
Yeah. So this is kind of an obvious one for me is I was a chemical engineer, a businessman. I worked, in a company where I managed people all over the country, where I traveled all over the country. I was interacting with customers and suppliers all day long. I was making big decisions, spending big money, other people's money, and building teams and helping people with their careers, and really, really engaged in a lot of different activities, both professionally and with the teams of people that I was working with. So I had just this mosaic of relationships of all different kinds. And then again, the nature of my condition is that I eventually needed to stop working. But like with the wheelchair, it's not, I didn't fall off a cliff or get run over by a bus. I had to decide when I was going to stop work. I had to decide that one day I was completely able to work and the next day I was completely disabled. That's just how our disability system works. And so I just had to pick a day when I was no longer able to work, and that was May 20th, 2009. And all of a sudden, I found myself at home, staring at a computer, and the world was going on without me. Mm. And that was a sinking feeling. So, so that's when I felt most lonely in this journey. Even though I wasn't technically lonely, I still had my wife, my family, lots of friends, lots of support. As I was leaving, everyone was like, go ahead, call me anytime, stop by the office and visit anytime. But those are statements that are well intended, but they don't really help you when you find yourself sitting at home all of a sudden. The world completely changed and not knowing what to do.
Reminds me, I read an incredible article about a cancer doctor who lost his wife to cancer in New York Magazine about a year and a half ago. It was astonishingly powerful. And one of the things he said at the end was, there are plenty of people to do something with, but there aren't a lot of people to do nothing with. And
I like that.
Yeah, I thought that was such an interesting idea, because even if you ended up calling one of your gajillion friends, it's not just being yourself. It's like making a plan.
Yeah. And this whole perception that you build of yourself, when you stop working, it is shot, and you almost have to rebuild from scratch. So that's what I set out to do. I became this different person. I was no longer in charge of things. I was no longer naturally interacting with people. And then on top of this all, I'm this natural introvert. So I had to decide if I was going to just, crawl in a hole and feed the introvert side of myself, or if I was going to reach out and start interacting with people in a different way. And the way my window to rebuilding myself was this blog that I started. As soon as I just put up a few posts at this blog, people started introducing themselves to me and telling me their stories and telling me how they appreciated my stories. And it just, I don't want to say it was, it took off. And I started becoming involved in projects, MS projects. And I was one of the first people to get certain treatments like this CCSVI treatment that was so hot back then. Turned out not to be very helpful, but boy, those of us who were interested in exploring that, we built this huge community of activists, and that's where I really became an MS activist, and all of a sudden and that's when I met people like you and others, and right now some of my closest friends and most important people in my life are people that I've met through starting this blog and reaching out and being sure not to fall in upon myself and fight those introverted tendencies and become part of a different community. And it's been extremely rewarding.
And now you are planning on taking it even a step further with a new book. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So here's the guy who didn't like to tell anybody anything about himself. And now I'm telling everybody everything. About myself.
I don't know if I need to know what you look like naked. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, I don't know. Chapter 43, third paragraph, you may not want to read that. So I had this long lost interest in, in high school. I thought I was a pretty decent writer. And then I went into the business world, and all I wrote was business reports for 25 years. And so I rediscovered the joy of writing, went through this blog, and people were kind enough to say, Mitch, why don't you write a book? You write so well. Why don't you write a book? And I thought, there's just not enough here to make an interesting book. But I sat down and I started writing it, and it took off, and it's been one of the great joys of my life is writing this book, and I've just finished it within the last couple of weeks. And I liken it to taking an English major and teaching them how to design a bridge. That's like taking an engineer like me and teaching them how to write a book. It's no less daunting. And so it's been a great fun for me to learn and to write. And sometime in the next year or so, we'll have this book out there for people to see what I've done and see what I've written about. And I hope this is just becomes an extension of the blog, where I'm able to help people, to use my cliche, enjoy the ride.
It's awesome. And I can't wait to read it. It's been such a pleasure to know you. And it was so great this summer to have an opportunity to swing through Maine and come to your house and introduce you to my kids. And it just felt real. And I think that as you have so articulately talked about the positives that have come out of expressing yourself and throwing it out there and just being who you are, I have it on my end too. And I think these types of connections and conversations just are so healing for everybody involved. I mean, it feels sort of limitless in terms of the feelings of fulfillment and, moments that are truly meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to tell people that are listening that if you think Kate energizes you to become a better person through interacting with her virtually, boy, you ought to spend a few minutes with this woman in the same room. And she's just a powerhouse, and she leaves you wanting to get to work and make your life better, make other people's lives better. Thanks for all you've done for me, Kate.
It's been a total pleasure, Mitch Sturgeon. Our paths will cross again. And again, for those of you who are listening, please check out Mitch's blog, enjoyingtheride.com. You can also get the play-by-play of his personal journey on my counterpain MS. Just go to profile search and type in Mitchell Sturgeon, as in the fish, and I can tell you with confidence, he doesn't look like one. I always appreciate talking to people like Mitch. And in this conversation that you just heard, I feel like he brought up a really interesting issue. So I wanted to pose a question back to you, the listener. How do you deal with someone who recognizes your MS, who sees your disability or your cognitive impairment? How do you treat them? How do you own it? How do you front them on it? And how do you gain empowerment and make the situation better? Please let us know at mycounterpain.com/Moodify.